Hello, listeners. This is Janine
and Kristen
from Henrico Casa. You are listening to our podcast, Vigilant Voices. Living life every day. Hello, listeners. We're so happy to have you with us today.
And every time we release a new episode, because we feel like we're talking with you and feel like we know you, because we know that we all share the belief that every child deserves a childhood.
And we shared the belief that when we know more about the challenges facing children and families in our community, we can help ensure that no child faces continued abuse, neglect, or trauma.
Right. So thank you again for joining us, listeners.
And so I'm hearing you say thank you, knowing it ties into our topic for today's discussion in right. November, manners.
That's right. Yeah. We're talking about more than manners today. We're talking about civility in general. Mm-hmm. You know, that would be defined, I guess, as the overall act of being polite or being respectful, being courteous.
Being kind.
Yeah.
Which I know is lacking, unfortunately, in many of the homes of the children that we serve. And frankly, it's disheartening because everyone deserves to be treated with respect and kindness.
Right, we do. And the teen in today's Casa case story, who I will call Diana, also deserves to be treated with respect. But that hasn't been the culture in her home. When her Casa was appointed to her case, she was in a juvenile detention center. Mm-hmm. She had grown up living with her biological mother, but ended up getting into trouble after running away multiple times. And she kind of carried out a few thefts and other criminal, kind of minor criminal. Yeah.
Yep. Well, and oftentimes when we see a child or a teen running away and getting in trouble with those sort of very minor, petty things, we really should pause and see if there's anything else going on at home that might actually be the underlying cause of those negative behaviors.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And in Diana's case, there had been a lot of conflict in her home. There was emotional and verbal abuse. Her family didn't really have an understanding of like healthy conflict resolution. Mm-hmm. And so unfortunately, but I guess not unexpectedly, Diana's mother never communicated with her while she was in the juvenile detention facility. Yeah. Not one call, not one visit. And so while Diana was finishing her time at that center, her mom decided that Diana would not be allowed to come home. And so Diana's Casa was tasked with helping her find a new place to live.
And I think what's really sad and heartbreaking about that is when, quote unquote, home really isn't a safe place that you can turn to or rely on, right? Yeah. Or a place that you can at least connect and just know that there's a certain level of respect. And it sounds like just even from this brief little story, Kristen, Diana's home definitely lacked a certain type of civility, as you said.
Yeah, well, and honestly, it's distressing because it also feels like civility is lacking not just in this home, in this story, but sometimes it feels like it's lacking in culture.
Absolutely.
In general.
Every day,
yeah.
Sadly.
And I feel like there's probably a lot of things to blame for this. You know, there's an overall shift in our culture towards being rushed and kind of a stressed society almost. And then social media, you know, has that short, like often divisive mode of communication.
And, you know, I think the media at large, frankly, you know, on a broader scale, you know, has something to do with this as well. There's just such a focus on conflict, competition, individualism versus like empathy and compassion and kindness. And so I think, unfortunately, what we seem to see is that uncivil like behavior that then has been kind of normalized, even though it's sensational. But then it becomes no longer shocking to see disruptive behaviors, maybe demeaning insults, or just generally this lack of respect in communication and how we communicate.
Yeah, and it especially feels like that in digital communication, right?
Yes. And with these divisive behaviors, you know, when they're acceptable, then it leaves children with less role models who are then demonstrating a more polite baseline of that communication.
Yeah, in the whole world, right? But also at home.
Right.
It makes me think of that saying about how like we hurt the ones we love, like it's acceptable to act out towards people who we know and love.
I mean, I think that's so toxic for the children, certainly the children that we serve here.
It is. And listener, here's the reason we're bringing this up today. Studies show that there is a relationship between resilience and civility.
And we've definitely talked about resilience before. And, you know, the reminder that resilience is one's ability to bounce back after trauma.
Right.
And it is what we want and strive for the children we serve to have, the ability to navigate through hard things, but to come out a little bit stronger on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And the building blocks for resilience are interconnected with what we'll call civil behaviors. For example, people are more likely to be resilient when they learn empathy and self-regulation.
Right.
Empathy, because that means they're looking to understand a situation or a person or a perspective, and then communicate in a polite or respectful way. Self-regulation, because that helps people manage their emotions, which hopefully then kind of prevents or limits conflict.
And both of those components of building resilience, I mean, really directly ties right into civility.
Yeah.
Teaching manners, demonstrating respect, promoting unity or harmony. Those really are civil behaviors, and they contribute to navigating life's trials with, again, that term, resilience.
Yeah, it's definitely all tied together. If you want to read more about the correlations, check out the article by Dr. Robert Brooks that we're linking to in the show notes. But as always, what we really want to spend time talking about is what we should then do with this information.
Right. It's like, okay, now that we know, then how are we going to be better or better support, in this case, the children?
Right.
And it sounds like part of a takeaway today is that we should be really nurturing civility in the children in our lives. And so how do we do that?
Right. Well, so Dr. Brooks, again, we'll link to his article. His first recommendation makes total sense. And that is that we need to first model the behavior we want to teach children, right? Children watch us. We've talked about that before.
Sponges.
Yeah, they notice what we do, what we say, how we say it. And as they develop, they model what they see in us. So if we want our children to show kindness, they need to see us being kind, right? If we want our children to be respectful of others, we need to show respect and speak respectfully to everyone in our life, including those who think differently than us.
Absolutely. I mean, freedom of thought is okay. But anytime we see a behavior in our children that we don't love, we need to look inward because they very well may be mimicking that behavior and just learning from our behaviors.
Yeah. So tip number one is to model the civil behaviors we want to see in children, right? And to me, directly related to that is to then maybe limit exposure to behaviors we don't want them to model or pick up, right? Maybe that's screening what they watch on TV, or maybe it's not letting them have sleepovers at so-and-so's house. You know, we can't prevent them from ever experiencing negative behaviors, but we can limit their exposure. And then from those experiences, create learning opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you could, as an example, say something like, I didn't like how so-and-so just spoke to their son. Did you notice that? Like, how did it make you feel?
Yeah, because they do notice.
Oh, for sure.
And none of us are perfect. So, if we do lose our temper, we can follow it up with, I'm so sorry. I try not to talk like that, but my anger got the better of me for a minute. I'm going to try to do better next time.
Yes.
Like, be honest with them.
Right. Anything and everything can be a learning experience. So I think tip number one is to model that civility in order for children to learn. I think tip number two would be then to teach effective communication skills.
Yeah, and I love that you're saying that, because sometimes I think we, like collective we, forget that communication is a skill and it does need to be taught.
Absolutely. And so examples of things that we can teach kids are active listening, how to express their emotions, but in a calm and respectful way.
Yeah.
And we can teach these things, model them, and then role play with children to really practice that respectful communication.
Yeah. And to me, that idea of respectful communication then ties into conflict resolution.
Absolutely.
Teaching kids how to resolve problems without becoming disrespectful or rude.
And it takes self-control and empathy and sometimes just manners, just straight good old-fashioned manners to navigate conflict in a respectful way because it is inevitable.
Yeah, definitely. I guess one other tip I'd like to add to our list here is to get children involved in positive groups or activities outside of your home.
Right.
Help them see that they're a part of something bigger than themselves. I think that helps to give them a sense of purpose and an opportunity to be involved with a group where then they can kind of learn and practice these civil behaviors that we're trying to teach them at home.
Right.
If they're contributing to something bigger, it always feels good.
Absolutely. And being part of a group or activity, then, hopefully they're learning things like cooperation, and sometimes conflict management right there, but it is an aspect of civility. And again, that's just that building block for resilience.
Yeah, most definitely.
So I want to come back to Diana because I've been thinking about her and her story. She obviously wasn't raised in a nurturing environment where civility was prioritized, but I hope that she's doing okay and it didn't prevent her from building resilience.
Yeah. Luckily, Diana had an adult in her life who did treat her with respect, who modeled empathy and positive communication skills. And that person was her CASA advocate.
Excellent.
Yeah, this advocate visited Diana weekly. He was actually the only person to visit Diana for her last 3 months in detention, literally the only person.
Yeah.
These weekly visits were an opportunity for him to listen to Diana and encourage her. And this advocate treated her with respect and helped her develop empathy and the ability to communicate her emotions in a calm way.
And those weekly conversations, I think, have probably been really important to her development.
Yeah.
So they help Diana build resilience and have some communication tools that she can now rely on again and again as she enters adulthood, but hopefully grounded in respect.
Yeah, definitely. Diana's relationship with her advocate did offer a sense of stability. And as she moved into a post-detention program, since she couldn't go home.
Right.
When Diana returned to court for her final hearing, she told the judge that she would not have survived detention without her CASA advocate.
Yeah.
The advocate was the only person who listened to her, who offered support, and who encouraged her to do better.
I love that. And we all need someone like that in our lives so that we know we're not alone and we can get a sense of how we frankly deserve to be treated.
Yeah, and how we should then treat others.
Absolutely,
right?
yes. So as we wrap up today's conversation, we want to leave you with a call to action like we always do.
Yeah, and we know that you're very likely coming up on some family gatherings for the holidays like we are. So our call to action is to simply use your manners at these family meals and activities.
I think that, yes, you can kind of hear those stories sometimes. But yeah, be polite, say please and thank you. Be open to, differing opinions and conversations, but make a point of modeling civility because the children in your life who are in those rooms and in the house are watching and they will follow your lead.
Thank you for listening to Vigilant Voices, Henrico Casa's podcast. We have a vision for all children to live in safe, healthy homes. You can help us make that happen. Tell a friend about our podcast and find us on social media.
I believe in the better days.